Now let us look at what the Quran says about embryology. Oh, sorry, got the wrong thing. It has been said that the idea of the embryo developing through stages is a modern one, and that the Quran is anticipating modern embryology by depicting differing stages. In a pamphlet entitled Highlights of Human Embryology by Keith Moore, Dr. Moore claims the realization that the embryo develops in stages in the uterus was not discussed or illustrated until the 15th century. We will weigh this claim by considering the meaning of the Arabic words used by the Quran, and secondly, by examining the historical situation leading up to and surrounding the Quran. We will start by looking at the main words using the word alaka, main verses. The Arabic word alaka in the singular, or alaq as the collective plural, is used 6 times. In the Surah of the Resurrection, Al-Qiyamah, 75, 35 to 39, we read, "Was he man, not a drop of sperm ejaculated? Then he became alaka, and God shaped and formed and made of him a pair, the male and the female." In the Surah of the Believer, Al-Mu'min, 40:67, it says, "He it is who created you from dust, then from a sperm drop, then from a leech-like clot, alaka, then brings you forth as a child, that perhaps you may understand." In the Surah of the Pilgrimage, Al-Hajj 22:5, it says, "O mankind, if you have doubt about the resurrection, consider that we have created you from dust, then from a drop of seed, then from a clot, alaka, then from a little lump of flesh, shapely and shapeless." And finally, the fullest treatment is in the Surah of the Believers, Al-Mu'minun, 23:12 to 14, which reads, "Verily, we created man from a product of wet earth, then placed him as a drop of seed in a safe lodging. Then we fashioned the drop a clot, alaka, and of the clot we fashioned a lump, and of the lump we fashioned bones, and we clothed the bones with meat. Then we produced it as another creation." And here you have the stages according to the Quran. Nutfa, sperm; alaka, clot; mudagha, piece of meat; adam, bones; and the 5th stage, dressing the bones with muscles. Over the last 100+ years, this word alaka has been translated as follows. There's 10 translations here. I'm not going to read them all. 3 are in French, where it says un gommot de sang, or a clot of blood. 5 versions are English, where it's either clot or leech-like clot. 1 version is in Indonesian, at the bottom there, segumpal darah, lump of or clot of blood. And the last one is Farsi, khun basta, a clot of blood. As every reader who has studied human reproduction will realize, there is no stage as a clot during the formation of a fetus. So this is a very major scientific problem. In the dictionaries of Wer and Abdanur, the only meanings given for alaka in this feminine singular are clot and leech. And in North Africa, both of these meanings are still used. Many patients have come to me to ask for a clot to be removed from their throat. And many women have come to me and told me their period didn't come. When I say, "I'm sorry, I can't give you medicine to bring your period because I believe that's a baby," they would say, "Mazel dim, it's still blood." So they were understanding these ideas of the Quran. Lastly, we must consider the first verses which came to Muhammad in Mecca. These are found in the 96th surah called alaq, clots, from the very word that we're studying. In 96:1-2 we read, "Proclaim, in the name of your Lord who created man from alaq." Here the word is in the collective plural. This form of the word can have other meanings because alaq is also the derived verbal noun of the verb alika. The verbal noun usually corresponds to the gerund in English, as in the sentence, "Swimming is fun." Therefore, we could expect it to mean hanging or clinging or adhering. But the 10 translators listed above have all used clot, or congealed blood, in this verse too. In spite of the number and qualifications of these translators who use the word clot, the French Dr. Maurice Bucaille has sharp words for them. He writes, "What is more likely to mislead the inquiring reader is once again the problem of vocabulary. The majority of translations describe, for example, man's formation from a blood clot. A statement of this kind is totally unacceptable to scientists specializing in the field. This shows how great the importance of an association between linguistic and scientific knowledge is when it comes to grasping the meaning of Quranic statements on reproduction." Put in other words, Bucaille is saying, nobody has translated the Quran correctly until I, Dr. Bucaille, came along. How does Dr. Bucaille think that it should be translated? He proposes that instead of clot, the word alaka should be translated as something which clings, which would refer to the fetus being attached to the uterus through the placenta. But as all you ladies who've been pregnant know, the thing which clings doesn't stop its clinging to become chewed meat. It keeps on being the thing which clings, which is attached by the placenta for 8.5 months. Thirdly, these verses say that the chewed meat becomes bones, and then the bones are covered with muscle. They give the impression that first the skeleton is formed, and then it is clothed with flesh, and Dr. Bucaille knows perfectly well that this is not true. The muscles and the cartilage precursors of the bones start forming from the somite at the same time. At the end of the 8th week, there are only a few centers of ossification started, but the fetus is already able to make muscular movement. In a personal letter from Dr. T.W. Sadler, who's associate professor in anatomy and the author of Langman's Medical Embryology, Dr. Sadler states, "At the 8th week post-fertilization, the ribs would be cartilaginous, not bone, and muscles would be present. Also at this time, ossification would just begin. Muscles would be capable of some movement at 8 weeks. It's always better to have 2 witnesses, so we shall see what Dr. Keith Moore has to say about the development of bones and muscles in his book, The Developing Human." Extracted from chapters 15 and 17, we find the following information. The skeletal system develops from mesoderm. The limb muscles develop in the limb buds that are derived from this somatic mesoderm. We see that here on this slide. It's difficult perhaps to see, but there's the limb bud. And then here there's just a little bit of cartilage with the muscles around. Here there's more cartilage. And this is the whole, the bones are formed and in the form of bones, but it's all cartilage. No bones yet. This second slide shows how it forms. Here's the cartilage. Now, just the bone looks like cartilage. And then it starts to have some calcium deposited. And then it starts to have ossification and bone formed. As the bone models form, I want to go back to this. As the bone models form, myoblasts develop a large muscle mass in each limb bud, separating into extensor and flexor muscles. In other words, the limb muscles develop simultaneously from the mesenchyme surrounding the developing bones. So there's the cartilage, and here are the muscles developing around the cartilage. During a personal conversation with Dr. Moore, I showed him Dr. Sadler's statement, and he agreed that it was absolutely valid. Conclusion: Dr. Sadler and Dr. Moore agreed. There is no time when calcified bones have been formed and then the muscles are placed around them. The muscles are there several weeks before there are calcified bones, rather than being added around previously formed bones as the Quran states. The Quran is in complete error here. The problems are far from being solved. Let us return to alaka. Dr. Moore also has a suggestion. He says another verse in the Quran refers to the leech-like appearance and the chewed-like stages of human development. From this definition, Dr. Moore has gone ahead to propose that a 23-day embryo 3 millimeters long. That's 1/8 of an inch. I can hardly put my fingers that close together without touching. This is Carnegie stage 10, shown on the inside cover of Moore's book. This is the beginning, and here's the sperm entering the egg. So that's stage 1. Comes down here to stage 6 in the 2nd week. And here is the 3rd week. And there's stage 10, and here is day 23. And this is what Dr. Moore wants to say looks like a leech. If we look further, though, and look at the X-ray, here's day 22, and the backbone is still open. And when we look at day 23, the backbone is open there, and it's open there, and the head is wide open. It doesn't look like a leech at all. And if you keep on, and this is a diagram of it. The head is open, the rostral neuropore. And finally, this diagram shows there is the 20-day embryo. It's got a yolk sac, it's got an umbilicus. It doesn't look like a leech at all. The problem, the great problem with these new definitions for the word alaka is that no confirming examples have been provided from the Arabic used in the centuries surrounding the Hijra. The only way to establish the meaning of the word is by usage. The only way to establish whether the singular form alaka can mean a 3-millimeter embryo or the thing that clings is to bring sentences demonstrating this usage from the literature of the Arabs of Mecca and Medina close to the time of Muhammad, especially from the language of the Quraysh. This will not be an easy task because much work has already been done on the clear Arabic of the Quraysh. The early Muslims understood intuitively the need to know exactly what the Quranic words mean, and for this reason they made comprehensive studies of their language and poetry. Hamza Boubacar, former rector of the main mosque in Paris, brought up this subject at a conference on the One God in Montpellier in 1985. He posed the question to the audience: has the comprehension of the text of the Quran known at the time of Muhammad remained stable? And his answer was, ancient poetry shows that it has. We can only conclude, if the verses which bring spiritual comfort and hope to Muslims have remained stable, then the scientific statements embedded in those verses must also be accepted as stable, unless new evidence can be brought forward. This is especially important since some of the verses say that this information is a sign. The Surah of the Believer, as we saw above, says, He it is who created you from dust, then from a sperm drop, then from a clot, alaka, that perhaps you may understand. And in the Surah of the Pilgrimage, he said, O mankind, if you have doubt about the resurrection, consider. Therefore, the question must be asked. If it was a clear sign to the men and women of Mecca and Medina, what did they understand from the word alaka, which would lead them to faith in the resurrection? The answer: we are going to examine the historical situation leading up to the time of Muhammad to see what Muhammad and his people believed about embryology. We will start with Hippocrates. According to the best evidence, he was born on the Greek island of Kos in 460 BC. And he has stages. His stages are as follows. The sperm is a product which comes from the whole body of each parent. Weak sperm coming from the weak parts, and strong sperm from the strong parts. Then he goes ahead and talks about the coagulation of the mother's blood. The seed, embryo, then is contained in a membrane. Moreover, it grows because of its mother's blood, which descends to the womb. For once a woman conceives, she ceases to menstruate. Then about flesh, he says at this stage, with the descent and coagulation of the mother's blood, flesh begins to be formed with the umbilicus. And lastly, bones, he says, as the flesh grows, it is formed into distinct members by breath. The bones grow hard and send out branches like a tree. Next, we will look at Aristotle. In his book on the generation of animals, sometime about 350 BC, he gives his stages of embryology. And he talks about first semen and menstrual blood, or catamenia. In this section, Aristotle speaks of the male semen as being in a pure state. It follows that what the female would contribute to the semen of the male would be material for the semen to work on. In other words, the semen clots the menstrual blood. Then he goes to flesh. He says nature forms this from the purest material, the flesh. And from the residue thereof it forms bones. And lastly, around the flesh, around the bones, and attached to them by thin fibrous bands, grow the fleshly parts. Clearly, the Quran follows this exactly. Sperm clotting the menstrual blood, which forms meat, then the bones are formed, and lastly, around about the bones, grow the fleshly parts. Next, we will consider Indian medicine. The opinion of Charaka in 123 AD and Susruta is that both the male and female contributed seed. The secretion of the male is called the sukra, semen. The secretion of the woman is called artava, or sanita, blood, and it is derived from the blood by way of food, by way of blood. Here we see that in the medicine of India, they too had the idea that the child was formed from semen and blood. Now we shall look at Galen. Galen was born in 131 AD in Pergamum, modern Bergama in Turkey. Galen says on semen, the substance from which the fetus is formed is not merely menstrual blood, as Aristotle maintained, but menstrual blood plus the two semens. The Quran agrees with Galen here when it says in Surah 76:2, "We created man from a drop of mingled sperm." Now we'll look at the Galen stages. Galen also taught that the embryo developed in stages. The first is that in which the form of the semen prevails. The next stage is when it has been filled with blood, and heart and brain and liver are still unarticulated and unshaped. This is the period that Hippocrates called fetus. The Quranic Surah 22:5 reflects this saying. Then out of a morsel of flesh, partly formed and partly unformed. And now the third period of gestation has come. Thus nature caused flesh to grow on and around all the bones. We saw above that the Quran agrees with this in Surah 23:14, where it says, "And we clothe the bones with meat." The fourth and final period is at the stage when all the parts in the limbs have been differentiated. Galen was so important in medicine that just about the time of the Hijra, 4 leading medical men in Alexandria, Egypt, decided to form a medical school, using 16 books of Galen as the basis of the studies. This continued up to and including the 13th century. We must now ask ourselves, what was the political, economic, and medical situation in Arabia at the time of Muhammad? From the Hadramaut in Yemen, the caravans of the spice trade passed north through Mecca and Medina and then reached into all of Europe. In North Arabia, in about 500 AD, the Ghassanids took over, and by 528, they controlled the Syrian desert over to the outskirts of Medina. Syriac, a form of Aramaic related to Arabic, was their official language. As early as 463, the Jews translated the Torah and Old Testament from Hebrew into Syriac. The British Museum has a copy. This made it available to the Ghassan, who were Christians, and to the Jewish tribes in Arabia. During this time, Sergius al-Rasaini, who died in Constantinople in 536, one of the earliest and greatest translators from Greek into Syriac, translated various works on medicine, including 26 works of Galen. This made them available in the kingdom of Khosrow I in Persia and to the Ghassan tribe whose influence extended to the outskirts of Medina. Khosrow I, Arabic Kisra, king of Persia, was known as Khosrow the Great. His troops conquered areas as far away as Yemen, and he also loved learning and started several schools. The school of Jundishapur became, during Khosrow I's long reign of 48 years, the greatest intellectual center of the time. Within its walls, Greek, Jewish, Nestorian, Persian, and Hindu thought and experience were freely exchanged. Teaching was done largely in Syriac, from Syriac translations of Greek texts. This meant that Aristotle, Hippocrates, and Galen were readily available when the medical school at Jundishapur was operating during his reign. The next step was that the conquering Arabs compelled the Nestorians to translate their Syriac texts of Greek medicine into Arabic. The translation from Syriac to Arabic was easy, as the two languages had the same grammar. Concerning the local medical situation during Muhammad's life, we know there were physicians living in Arabia during this period. Harith ben Khalada was the best educated physician trained in the healing arts. He was born about the middle of the 6th century at Taif in the tribe of Bani Thaqif. He traveled through Yemen and then Persia, where he received his education in the medical sciences at the great medical school of Jundishapur, and thus was intimately acquainted with the medical teachings of Aristotle, Hippocrates, and Galen. Having completed his studies, he practiced as a physician in Persia, and during this time he was called to the court of King Khosrow, with whom he had a long conversation. He came back to Arabia about the beginning of Islam and settled down at Taif. While there, Abu al-Khair, a king of Yemen, came to see him in connection with a certain disease, and on being cured, rewarded him with much money and a slave girl. Though Harith ben Khalada did not write any book on medicine, his views on many medical problems are preserved in his conversation with Khosrow. About the eye, he says that it is constituted of fat, which is the white part. And then the second is constituted with water, which is the black part, and of wind, which constitutes the eyesight. Well, these things we know to be wrong now, but this was Greek thought. All this goes to show the acquaintance of Harith with the Greek doctors. Summarizing the situation in a few words in his book, Histoire de la Médecine Arabe, Dr. Lucien Leclerc writes, Harith ben Khalada studied medicine at Jundishapur, and Muhammad owed to Harith a part of his medical knowledge. Thus, with the one as well as the other, we easily recognize the traces of Greek medicine. Sometimes Muhammad treated the sick, but in the difficult cases, he would send the patients to Harith. Another educated person around Muhammad was Nadir bin Harith. Not related to the doctor, he was a Qurayshite and cousin of Muhammad, and had also visited the court of Khosrow. He had learned Persian and music, which he introduced among the Quraysh at Mecca. However, he was not sympathetic to Muhammad, mocking some of the stories in the Quran. Muhammad never forgave him for this, and when he was taken prisoner at the Battle of Badr, he caused him to be put to death. In summary, we see that 1, Arabs living in Mecca and Medina in 600 had political and economic relations with people from Ethiopia, Yemen, Persia, and Byzantine. A cousin of Muhammad knew Persian well enough to do his musical studies in it. 3, the Ghassan tribe, which ruled the Syrian desert over to the gates of Medina, used Syriac, one of the main languages used to teach medicine in Jundishapur, as their official language. An ill king of Yemen came to Taif to consult the physician Harith ben Khalada, who had been trained where? At Jundishapur, the best medical school in that world, and to whom Muhammad sometimes sent patients. 5, during Muhammad's lifetime, a new medical school was established in Alexandria, using the 16 books of Galen as their texts. This all shows that there was ample opportunity for Muhammad and the people around him to have heard of the embryological theories of Aristotle, Hippocrates, and Galen when they went to seek treatment from Harith ben Khalada and other local doctors. Thus, when the Quran says in the late Meccan Surah of the Believer, 40:67, He it is who created you from dust, then from a sperm drop, then from a leech-like clot, that perhaps you may understand, And then in the Surah of the Pilgrimage, O mankind, if you have doubt about the resurrection, consider what we have created, that we have created you from dust. It is correct for us to ask again, what were they to understand? What were they to consider? And here are the Quranic stages again. Nutfa, sperm, alaka, clot, mudagha, piece of meat, adam, bones, and 5, dressing the bones with muscles. The answer is very clear. They were understanding and considering that which was common knowledge, the embryological stages as taught by the Greek physicians. I don't mean that Muhammad's listeners all knew the names of the Greek physicians, but they knew the embryological stages of the Greek physicians. They believed that the male sperm mixed with the female menstrual blood to cause it to clot, and this became the baby. 2, they believed there was a time when the fetus was formed and unformed. 3, they believed the bones formed first and then were covered with muscle. Allah was using that common knowledge as a sign encouraging the listeners and readers to turn to Him. The trouble is that this common knowledge was and is not true. Arab physicians after Muhammad. We must now look at 2 well-known physicians from the period after Muhammad. Obviously, they had no effect on the Quran, but they demonstrated that faith in the embryological ideas of Aristotle, Hippocrates, and Galen continued among the Arabs right up to the 1600s. If the correct translation of alaka is leech-like substance, as modern Muslims like Shabir Ali claim, there is no place where these post-Quranic doctors said so. In fact, it's just the opposite. The ideas of these Greek physicians were being used to explain the Quran, and the Quran was quoted to enlighten the meaning of the Greek physicians. The human being takes its origin from 2, this is speaking about Ibn Sina, or Avicenna. The human being takes its origin from 2 things. The male sperm, which plays the part of factor. The female sperm, first part of the menstrual blood, which provides the matter. Thus we see that Ibn Sina gave the female semen exactly the same role that Aristotle had assigned to the menstrual blood. It is difficult to overstate the importance of Ibn Sina as a scientific and philosophical authority for the pre-modern Europeans. Then we're going to look at Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah. Ibn Qayyim took full advantage of the agreement between Quranic revelation and Greek medicine. This is not very clear, probably, but the Hippocrates is in purplish, and the Quran is in bold type, green, and the Hadith is in purple, and commentaries are in red, and his own thoughts in sort of a blue-green. So it starts out, he says, Hippocrates said in the 3rd chapter of Kitab al-Aginnah, the semen is contained in a membrane, and it grows because of the blood of its mother, which descends to the womb. Some membranes are formed at the beginning, others after the 2nd month, and others in the 3rd month. And this phrase about the blood descending to the womb, we saw it when we looked at Hippocrates' slide. That is why God said, here the Quran is mentioned, He creates you in the womb of your mothers, by one formation after another in 3 darknesses. That's Quran 39:6. Then he gives his own ideas. Since each of these membranes has its own darkness, when God mentioned the stages of creation and transformation from one state to another, He also mentioned the darknesses of the membranes. Most commentators explain, and here are the words of the commentators, it is the darkness of the belly, and the darkness of the womb, and the darkness of the placenta. In a second example, we read, Hippocrates said, the mouth opens up spontaneously, and the nose and ears are formed from the flesh. The ears are opened, and the eyes, which are filled with a clear liquid. The prophet used to say, I worship Him who made my face and formed it and opened my hearing and eyesight, and so forth. Here we look at Hippocrates again, and there in the 2nd stage is the same thing we just read. Ibn Qayyim is quoting Hippocrates and speaks of the mother's blood descends around the membrane. He could do this, as we have seen, because the educated people of Muhammad's time were familiar with Greek medicine. However, what is important for us here today to realize is that there is no place where the Quran corrected Greek medicine. There is no place where Ibn Qayyim was shouting, "Hey, you guys, you've got this all wrong. The correct meaning of alaka is that which clings or leech-like substance." On the contrary, Ibn Qayyim was demonstrating the agreement between the Quran and the Greek medicine, their agreement in error. A final witness is the commentary of Baidawi in 1200 AD. Here we have the commentary. We have we have the Quran here. We have his commentary, and here it's been translated. And he says, then from alaka, a piece of solid blood is his explanation of alaka. Alaka is underlined, that's from the Quran. And here's his explanation, a piece of solid blood. Then he goes on, then from a piece of meat from the Quran. A piece of meat originally as much as can be chewed, and so forth. As I mentioned at the beginning of this study, it has been said that the idea of the embryo developing through stages is a modern one, and that the Quran is anticipating modern embryology by depicting differing stages. Yet we have seen that Aristotle, Hippocrates, the Indians, and Galen have all discussed the stages of embryological development during the 1,000 years before the Quran. And after the coming of the Quran, the account of the different stages, as described by the Quran and the Greek doctors, was carried on in the teachings of Avicenna and Ibn Qayyim, and is essentially the same as that taught by Galen and those preceding him. Concerning the bone stage, it's clear, as Dr. Moore demonstrated so capably in his textbook, that muscles start forming from the somites at the same time as the cartilage models of the bones. There's no bone stage where there's a skeleton sitting here and then the muscles are plastered around it. It's equally clear that alaka in the Quran means clot, and that the Quraysh who heard Muhammad speaking understood him to be referring to the menstrual blood as the female contribution to the developing baby. Therefore, we can conclude that during all these years, the Quranic verses on embryology, saying that man is created from a drop of sperm which becomes a clot, were in perfect accord with the science of the first century of the Hijra, of the time of the Quran. But when compared with the modern science of the 20th century, Hippocrates is in error, Aristotle is in error, Galen is in error, and the Quran is in error. They are all in serious error.
In the field of embryology, Dr. William Campbell spent approximately half of his talk on that. Time will not permit me to reply to every small thing which are illogical. I'll just give a brief reply, which will be satisfactory, inshallah. And for more details, you can refer to my video cassette, Quran Modern Science, and my other cassettes on Quran and medical science. There were a group of Arabs who collected the data dealing in the Quran about embryology and the hadiths dealing with embryology, and they presented it to Professor Keith Moore, who was the chairman and the head of the Department of Anatomy in the University of Toronto in Canada. And at present, he is one of the leading scientists in the field of embryology. After reading the various translations of the Quran, he was asked to comment, and he said, most of the verses of the Quran and the Hadith are in perfect conformity with modern embryology. But there are a few verses which I cannot say that they are right. Neither can I say that they are wrong, because I myself don't know about it. And two such verses were the first two verses of the Quran to be revealed from Surah Iqra or Surah Alaq, chapter 96, verse number 1 and 2, which says, Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq. Khalaqal insana min alaq. Read, recite, or proclaim in the name of thy Lord, who created the human beings from something which clings, a leech-like substance. Regarding Dr. William Campbell's statement that to analyze the meaning of a word, you have to see what was the meaning at that time when it was revealed, at that time when the book was written. And he rightly said that to analyze the meaning, you have to analyze the meaning at the time it was revealed and to the people who it was meant for. As far as this statement of his is concerned, regarding the Bible, I do agree with it totally, because the Bible was only meant for the children of Israel for that time. It's mentioned in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter number 10, verse number 5 and 6. Jesus Christ, peace be upon him, tells his disciples, go ye not in the way of the Gentiles. Who are the Gentiles? The non-Jews, the Hindus, the Muslims. But rather go to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Jesus Christ, peace be upon him, said in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter number 15, verse number 24, I am not sent but to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. So Jesus Christ and the Bible were only meant for the children of Israel. Since it was meant for them, to analyze the Bible, you have to use the meaning of the word which was utilized at that time. But the Quran was not meant only for the Arabs of that time. Quran is not meant only for the Muslims. The Quran is meant for the whole of humanity. And it is meant to be for eternity. Quran says in Surah Ibrahim, chapter 14, verse 52, in Surah Baqarah, chapter number 2, verse 185, and Surah Zumar, chapter 39, verse 41, that the Quran is meant for the whole of humankind. And Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was not sent only for the Muslims or the Arabs. Allah says in the Quran, in Surah Anbiya, chapter number 21, verse number 107, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ, that we have sent thee as a mercy, as a guidance to the whole of humankind. So as far as the Quran is concerned, you cannot limit the meaning only for that time, because it is meant for eternity. So one of the meanings of alaqa is leash-like substance or something which clings. So Professor Keith Moore said, I do not know whether the early stage of embryo looks like a leech. And he went in his laboratory and he analyzed the early stage of an embryo under a microscope and compared it with a photograph of a leech, and he was astonished at the striking resemblance. This is the photograph of a leech and human embryo. What Dr. William Campbell showed you is the other perspective of it. If I show this book, it looks like a rectangle. If I show you like that, it's a different perspective. That diagram is given in the book. The diagram which you show on the slide is given there, and I'll deal with it inshallah. Professor Keith Moore, after about 80 questions asked to him, he said, if you would have asked me these 80 questions 30 years ago, I would not be able to answer more than 50%, because embryology has developed recently in the past 30 years. He said this in the 80s. Now, do we believe in Dr. Keith Moore, whose statement is available outside in the foyer, if video cassettes are available? This is the truth, annawul haq, recorded statement. So will you believe Dr. William Campbell's personal conversation with Professor Keith Moore? Or the one mentioned in this book with Islamic edition, as well as the photograph that I've shown to you. And in the video cassette available outside, you can see it. He makes those statements. So you have to choose which is more logical. Personal discussion with Dr. William Campbell, or his statement on video, like how Dr. William Campbell showed my video. 100% proof what I said. Moon is reflected light. I'll come to it later on. And whatever additional information he got from Quran and Hadith, it was incorporated later into this book, The Developing Human, the 3rd edition. And this book got an award for the best medical book written by a single author in that year. This is the Islamic edition that was put forward by Sheikh Abdul Majid Zindani and certified by Keith Moore himself. The Quran says in Surah Mu'minun, chapter 23, verse number 13, and Surah Hajj, chapter 22, verse number 5, and no less than 11 different places in the Quran that the human beings have been made from a nutfa, a minute quantity of liquid. Like a trickle that's remaining in the cup, nutfa in Arabic, a very small quantity. Today we have come to know in one seminal emission, in which there are several millions of sperm, only one is required to fertilize the ovum. The Quran refers as nutfa. Quran says in Surah Sajda, chapter 32, verse number 8, we have created the human beings from solala. That means the best part of a whole. The one sperm which fertilizes the ova, out of the millions of sperm, the Quran refers to as sulala, best part of the whole. And Quran says in Surah Insan, chapter 76, verse number 2, we have created the human beings from nutfatun amshaj, a minute quantity of mingled fluid, referring to the sperm as well as the ovum. Both are required for the fertilization. The Quran describes the various embryological stages in great detail, of which the slides was shown to you by Dr. William Campbell. He helped me to complete this topic. It's mentioned in Surah Mu'minun, chapter 23, verse number 12 to 14. The translation is that we have created the human beings from a nutfa, a minute quantity of liquid, then placed it in a qarar-e-makin, a place of security. Then we made it into an alaqa, a leech-like substance, something which clings, a congealed clot of blood. Then we made that alaqa into a mudga, a chewed-like lump. Then we made the mudga into idama, bones. Then clothed the bones with lahm, flesh. Then we made it a new creature. Blessed be Allah, who's the best to create. These three verses of the Quran speak about the various embryological stages in great detail. First, the nutfa, placed in a place of security, made into an alaqa. Alaqa has got three meanings. One is something which clings. And we know that in the initial stages, the embryo clings to the uterine wall and continues clinging till the end. Point number 2, that it also means a leech-like substance. And as I discussed earlier, the embryo in the initial stages does look like a leech. Besides looking like a leech, it also behaves like a leech. It receives its blood supply from the mother, like a bloodsucker. And the third meaning, which Dr. William Campbell objected to, that is the right meaning, the congealed clot of blood, and that's why Quran has a scientific error. And I do agree with him that Dr. William Campbell didn't agree. He said, how can it mean a congealed clot of blood? Because this is the case, then the Quran is wrong. I'm sorry to say, Quran is not wrong. Dr. William Campbell, with due respect to him, he is wrong. Because today, after advancement of embryology, even Dr. Keith Moore, he says that in the initial stages, the embryo, besides looking like a leech, also looks like a congealed clot of blood. Because in the initial stages of the stage of alaqa, 3 to 4 weeks, the blood is clotted within closed vessels. And Dr. William Campbell made it easy for me. He showed you a slide. It will be difficult for you to see, but this is the slide he showed you. This is exactly what Professor Keith Moore said looks like a clot, in which the blood is clotted within closed vessels, and during the 3rd week of the embryo, the blood circulation doesn't take place. It starts later on. Therefore, it assumes the appearance of a clot. And even if you observe the conceptus, that's after abortion takes place, you can see it looks like a clot. Only one line answer is sufficient to answer all the allegations of Dr. William Campbell, is that the stages of the Quran, while it describes the embryological stages, is only based on appearance. Appearance. First is the appearance of a alaqa, a leech-like substance, as well as a clot of blood. And Dr. William Campbell rightly said that some ladies come and ask, please remove the clot. It does look like a clot. And the stages are based on appearance. It is created from something which appears like a clot, which appears like a leech, and is also something which clings. Then the Quran says we made that alaqa into a mudga, a chewed-like lump. Professor Keith Moore took plasticine and bit between his teeth to make it look like a mudga. The teeth mark resembled the somites. Dr. William Campbell said, when the alaqa becomes a mudga, the clinging is yet there. It is there till 8.5 months. So, the Quran is wrong. I told you in the beginning, the Quran is describing the appearance. The leech-like appearance and the clot-like appearance is changed to the chewed-like appearance. It yet continues to cling till the end, there's no problem. But the stages are divided on appearance, not on the function. Later on, Quran says, we made the mudga into izama, bones. Then clothed the bones with flesh. Dr. William Campbell said, and I do agree with him, that the precursors of the muscles and the cartilages, that is the bones, they form together. I agree with that. Today, embryology tells us that the primordia of the muscles and the bones, they form together between the 25th and the 40th day, which the Quran refers to as the stage of mudghah. But they are not developed. They are not developed. Later on, at the end of the 7th week, the embryo takes form of human appearance. Then the bones are formed. Today, modern embryology says the bones are formed after the 42nd day. And it gives an appearance of a skeletal thing. Even at this stage, when the bones are formed, the muscles aren't formed. Later on, after the 7th week and the starting of 8th week, are the muscles formed. So Quran is perfect in describing first alaqa, then mudghah, then izaman, then clothed with flesh. And when they form, the description is perfect. And Professor Keith Moore said that the stages that how it is described in modern embryology, stage 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it's so confusing. The Quranic stage on embryology, describing on the basis of appearance and the shape, is far more superior. Alhamdulillah. Therefore he said that I have no objection in accepting that Prophet Muhammad is the messenger of God and that this glorious Quran has to be a divine revelation from Almighty God.
Well, Dr. Naik has brought up some real problems. I don't agree with his answer about the Quran in terms of the alaqa and mudagha. I still think it's a big problem. But that's his opinion and my opinion. So everybody will have to go home and think about it themselves.
Time to touch on all the points on embryology. I've touched on all of the 8-9 topics which he spoke on. Embryology, I'll go more in detail. The points he raised in embryology, besides the one I clarified in my talk, he said that the stages of development were mentioned by Hippocrates and by Galen, and he showed the various slides. The point to be noted, just because someone says some things which are matching with the Quran, that doesn't mean that Quran has been copied from that. Suppose I make a statement, if I make a statement which is correct, which was said by somebody else earlier, that doesn't mean I've copied. It may be, it may not be. To use the conflict approach with the Quran, yes, he copied. Okay, fine. But let's analyze. The Quran doesn't take the things which were wrong from Hippocrates. If you would have copied, you would have copied everything. It is logical. Unless he's a scientist, okay, this is correct. Oh, this is wrong. I won't copy that. This is correct, I'll copy that. All the stages of Hippocrates and Galen is not the same as the Quran. Hippocrates and Galen doesn't speak about leech-like substance. They don't speak about mudghah at all. Where do they speak? Hippocrates and Galen, at that time they said that even the women have got semen. Who says that? Even the Bible says that. If you read in the Bible, it mentions in Leviticus chapter number 12, verse number 1 to 2, that women give out seed. So actually Bible is copying from Hippocrates. And Bible says in Job, chapter number 10, verse number 9 and 10, that we have made the human being from clay, like poured out milk and curdled cheese. Poured out milk and curdled cheese is exact plagiarization from Hippocrates. Why plagiarization? Because surely that's not the word of God. That portion is unscientific. It was said by Hippocrates and Galen, the Greeks, that human beings are created like curdled cheese. And Bible copies that exactly. But Quran, alhamdulillah, as if you analyze and read the books of embryology, even of Dr. Keith Moore, he said that Hippocrates and the other people like Galen, etc., they did give a lot of things to embryology initially, as well as Aristotle. Many were right, many were wrong. And further he goes to say, in the Middle Ages, or at the time of the Arabs, the Quran speaks about something additional. If it was exactly copied, why would Dr. Keith Moore in his book give due credit to the Quran? He even gives due credit to Aristotle, to Hippocrates, but mentions there, many were wrong. That he doesn't mention with the Quran. That is enough proof that Quran wasn't copied from the Greek time. Regarding